verge of just about any received opinion or casual consensus you care to mention. His opinions on everything from politics to religion, drug addiction to propaganda on the Archers infuriate some and delight others, sometimes with the emphasis on infuriate. His religious views were for many years famously a source of public disagreement with his late brother, the atheist polemicist Christopher Hitchens. Peter Hitchens, good morning.
Good morning.
You've described religion, Peter, as the one reliable force that stands in the way of the power of the strong over the weak, the one reliable source that forms the foundation of the concept of the rule of law. I'm just wondering, is that all religion, any religion?
Well, it's certainly the Christian religion, which is the one which I'm mainly concerned with. I don't really want to have a long theological discussion, partly because I'm not terribly interested, partly because I don't think that's what anybody wants to hear. But I think the general force of a belief in a creator is to make us realize that there is something which stands above human power and above human desire, which restrains those things, which is within us, and which is actually the only source of the concept that there is a force above power and above strength and above the fundamental concept of unreligious life, which is that might is right and greed is good.
It is a point that you've made often before, and without getting into theological nitpicking, the Christian religion spent hundreds of years getting its hands on earthly power in any way it could and abusing it in all sorts of ways, didn't it?
Of course it did, yes, because it's a human institution which has all the faults of human beings, and as a result, it's no great surprise if it has the faults that all human institutions do. That doesn't mean that religion itself is at fault.
And what becomes of us then when we don't have this belief in a power beyond us to constrain earthly utopianism?
Well, we worship ourselves and we worship earthly power.
And am I right in thinking that your sense is that the kind of civilization we have and we value is in danger of being lost, of collapsing if we don't have this?
Not just in danger, it's in the process of disappearing all around us. And I regard most politics these days as a form of idolatry. You see the ridiculous enthusiasm for Donald Trump in the United States, for instance, is partly a result of people placing far too much faith in the power of politics to alter their lives and paying far too little attention to their own power to alter themselves.
So what kind of system do you want to see? What will save us?
Oh, nothing will save us in the temporal way. I've long ago gave up practical day-to-day politics as a complete waste of time.
Well, yes, practical day-to-day politics is sort of the way that we proceed.
Well, it
at
is,
the moment.
but currently it rejects a huge number of very important ideas which would be very useful in sorting out the problems which you face as a society. I used to think that I might be able to make some impression upon politics, and I found that even attempting to enter the fringes of any of the political parties with the opinions which I have is more or less impossible. It's a closed world. They define something called the centre, and if you don't happen to believe in what the centre says, then you're not welcome. So you will never get selected as a candidate. If by any faint chance you accidentally did, you would be on your own in any legislative assembly and powerless to do anything. So it is a closed world in which the ideas are already set.
But imagine, for the sake of argument, that it weren't, and you were able to have the power to bring your vision of how the world should be to fruition. What would it be? What would it look like?
Well, I wouldn't dare to imagine that I had such a vision. All I can do, all anybody can do in politics, is to ameliorate and to give people as much liberty as possible to follow their consciences. To even entertain the idea that I could create an ideal society would seem to me to be an arrogant fantasy. There are great limits on what politics can and should do, and the more politics interferes in the great issues of life, as it did in the communist world, for instance, the more damage it does.
Where did your belief, I suppose, your interest in religion and the importance of it and the place that it should have in the world, where did all that come from? Because am I right in thinking as a teenager you did a very sort of ritual burning of your Bible and
Oh yes,
thought something very different.
I was a very convinced, committed, arrogant atheist, and I'm always amazed now when I come across atheists who say, "Oh well, it's just a default position. It doesn't involve any decision. I didn't really decide to be an atheist. I just am. I decided to be an atheist because it seemed to me to liberate me from an awful lot of constraints which prevented me from doing what I very much wanted to do." And I found that when I did the things that I wanted to do, that the consequences were generally pretty bad, both for me and for other people. And that by deliberately casting aside what I'd been brought up to believe, I discovered that what I'd been brought up to believe contained a good deal more sense than I'd at first thought.
And when did you come round to actually, making a sort of public commitment?
It's a long, slow process. You don't have. I've certainly experienced no flashes of light, swoons, or visions. In fact, a lot of the time you spend resisting the conclusions of your experience. You know that there is a door which, if you open it, will bring you into a different world where you will lose an awful lot of friends, undergo a fair amount of derision, and generally step outside the conventional idea of what a normal person should be. And you hesitate to do it for a long time. And if you're reasonably clever, and I count myself to be reasonably clever, you can come up with a lot of good arguments for not doing so. So I expect I hesitated on the edge of actual belief for probably a dozen years.
And am I right in thinking it was the getting married in your 30s, deciding to get married in a church and make your vows in a church that sort of crystallized for you what it was that
it certainly brought it to a clear point of decision and public statement, yes, but I think I'd got there rather before then. To say something publicly and to think something privately are two slightly different things, but they're not that different.
You've talked about a painting of the Last Judgment that played its part.
Well, I talk about it, but lots of people long for me to have some kind of conversion moment because that's what they like to think happens. They think all religious believers are basically mad, so that they want us all to have some kind of second where a bolt of lightning strikes us in the cerebellum and we cease being rational. No, the point about that picture was that it scared me out of my wits, and I had to acknowledge that I was scared by it. I realised that
paint it for us with words, if you wouldn't mind.
All right, okay. It's Roger van der Weyden's Last Judgment. It's in the Hospice de Beaune, which is a lovely old late medieval hospital in that beautiful town, and it is a traditional Last Judgment with the souls of the damned being divided from the souls of the blessed. The thing is that the souls of the damned, as they flee from the sound of the last trump, look extraordinarily modern. They looked very much like the people I knew, and in a couple of cases quite like me. And you see them fleeing. And the other thing that van der Weyden did, which astonished me at the time, was that at least one of the figures was actually vomiting with fear. And this was so graphic and seemed to me to be drawn from some actual truth of observation that it went right in, and I couldn't ignore it. I thought, good heavens, this thing is still doing the job that it was painted for hundreds of years afterwards. And I went away. I'd wandered in after a very nice lunch of the kind which you can get in that part of Burgundy, and feeling pretty complacent and that warm vinous glow that you have. And suddenly I felt a little chilly.
Are you still afraid of the alternative?
Oh, very much so. Yes, I think that one has to recognise that if one desires justice in the universe for others, then one has to desire and accept it for oneself. And if there is justice, then, good heavens, I've done an awful lot of things to deserve some fairly severe treatment.
I wonder what effect you think that the loss of fear, which for centuries drove people's Christian faith, didn't it? But possibly not fear alone, but it played a very large part. What do you think the loss of fear has done to the modern mind?
Oh, I think all the fear is concentrated in a very short time at the ends of our lives. We push death to the margins of life completely, and therefore we push the fear of what might come afterwards to the margins as well, and simply don't think about it or consider it.
Can I ask you this? I mean, I'm sensing a bit of a reluctance to talk about the details of your faith, but
Well, I know
what?
I don't particularly want to talk about it. No, but I'll answer reasonable questions, but
Okay, here's a
not
reasonable question.
not beyond a certain point.
What is it you believe? What's the core belief of the Christianity that you espouse and that
Well,
came to matter so much to you?
okay. So first of all, this is independent of whether my belief is Christian or not. First of all, I believe that the universe is a designed and orderly place with a purpose. Secondly, I think that the Christian Gospels give us the best clue to what that purpose might be that we've ever been given, in a rather convincing and poetic way. And that the main task which we have in life is to try and conform ourselves to that idea of goodness as far as possible, and to obtain as much power over ourselves to reform ourselves that we can, but obviously we will fail. And that the concept of divine grace and the possibility of forgiveness are vital, especially if, like me and like many other people, you've done things for which there really can't conceivably be any forgiveness on this planet.
You're not, I think it's fair to say, one of life's natural optimists.
Good
Are
heavens,
you?
no! Optimism is a road to misery, and optimists must be the most unhappy people on the face of the earth. If you want
Are you
cheerful,
pessimistic about everything?
yes, of course. It's a terrifically good guide to life, and when you're wrong, then you're pleasantly surprised. What could possibly be wrong with that?
No, but you see, you're not pessimistic about everything. I mean, for instance, you're keen on marriage. That's something positive.
It's not positive, but it's not optimistic. The institution of marriage, like the American Bill of Rights, is based on the idea that people who aren't governed by fairly strong rules will misbehave. It's fundamentally pessimistic in nature. That's why the Bill of Rights, and indeed our Bill of Rights too, are such wonderful documents, because they're based on a sensible pessimism about how people will behave if they're not restrained.
What about Christian hope? That's something
Well, that's eternal.
that Christians are usually comfortable with.
That's
I know
eternal.
it's not the same as optimism, but,
No, but that's hope in the eternal. It's not hope in the temporal.
oh, that's a cop out.
It's not. It's
Of course
absolutely
it
not.
is.
It's
What's
an
it? I
absolute.
mean, eternal hope of what, though?
Eternal hope. First of all, that there is justice in the universe, which is what I most fundamentally desire, and that this life is not all that there is. Beyond that, it's speculation, isn't it? But those are the things I hope for.
Listen, we've got more talking to do, Peter. Thank you very much. This is most exhilarating. You're listening to Sunday Morning with me, Sally Magnuson. My guest is author and journalist Peter Hitchens. Peter, you've chosen some music for us, which we're going to hear at this juncture. It's Farewell, Farewell by Fairport Convention, featuring Sandy Denny. Why this one?
It speaks to a certain moment in my life when because it refers very strongly, I think, to the terrible crash in which the Fairport Convention were involved in early 1969. And oddly enough, in the same year, I was involved in a very bad motor accident. And for me, it was a sort of end of the cheerful, sunny blue day of the 1960s. And I think listening to it now reminds me very much of that sensation, and of a turning point in my life that is rather beautifully reflected, I think.
Farewell, Farewell by Fairport Convention, the choice of my guest today, Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens. Peter, let me take you back to your early life. Your family consisted of your mother, your father, your older brother, who was the equally renowned writer Christopher Hitchens, who died in 2011. What was it about your family background that produced two such, smart, opinionated, argumentative, and rather fine writers?
Well, thank you for saying so. Just lucky, I guess. I don't know. I'm not an expert on how these things happen, honestly. where it all came from and the hereditary mixture and everything else. It's a strange life growing up as we did, as I say, to begin with, in a naval family. My father was beached after the Suez Crisis, as so many career naval officers were after 30 years, most of it at sea, and so we were dumped a bit after that. But we were moving around a lot. We spent a lot of time at boarding schools, and when not at boarding schools, leading a almost feral life. I don't really remember having anybody much at home looking after me when I was at home. School was pretty constrained, but as soon as I got home, it was just out in the road, out in the street, left to my own devices. Perhaps an awful lot of chance to exercise the imagination. I don't know.
I mean, it wasn't especially bookish household, or one where you had debates around the dinner table.
Not particularly bookish, no. There were books. More books, less television, less electronics than there would have been now, which is just an advantage which we had, but not especially. I read a fair bit. I liked to do it. It was a good place into which to escape, and I've always found it so.
What were your parents like?
Well, do you know what? I don't really know, because they were absent for so much of the time. I've tried in after years to form fair and just opinions of them, because you know the way it is. People often tend to blame their parents or say rude things about them later in life, which I decline to do. My father was the child of a very constrained household. His father was a teacher who had come up from the very grim back streets of Portsmouth, and a very forceful person. I still remember him stomping round his house, which was a museum of the Edwardian era, with a kettle singing on the hob and pictures of Lady Bountiful on the wall and a mangle in the shed. He was, I think, something of a domestic tyrant, and his children must have grown up under pretty strict arrangements, and my father was fairly determined, I think, not to do that himself. My mother, which I only discovered after she was dead, the full details of this, had the most catastrophic childhood, with her own family had broken up, and she'd been sent off quite early on to live with relatives because her mother wasn't able to look after her. But she'd managed to overcome all that, and you wouldn't have known, as I say, only discovered after she died that it had happened. But I don't think I ever got to know either of them particularly well, either then or later, or asked them enough questions, or really discovered what kind of people they were. We grew up really in the 1930s, but it was in the 1950s, and that life was still lived by my parents' generation, particularly the wartime generation, very much as if they were trying to recover the pre-war era, which had been snatched away from them by the privation of war. And so things were stiffer and more formal than they would be now.
What sort of parent do you think that's made you?
I think you'd probably have to ask my children what sort of parent I am, and I'm not going to help you do that.
Go on, what would they say?
I have no idea. I just leave it to them.
You have? Yes, you have.
No. I really not going to speculate on that.
Okay, have you consciously tried to be a different kind of parent from the one that your parents were to you?
Not consciously tried. I mean, I know I've had the opportunity to be a different kind of parent. I've been much more fortunate than them. I didn't have a war in my life, for instance. I was able to start the whole business much earlier than they were, and in circumstances so much more propitious that I wouldn't dream of making a comparison of that kind and saying I did a better job than them. That would be unfair.
Are you a hands-on parent? I mean, did you help with the bathing and the nappies? Did you go to the rugby matches?
Up to a point, I think would be the answer to that. But again,
Lord Copper.
You'd have to ask my wife, and she's not here, so.
What sort of relationship did you have with your brother, Christopher?
Oh, pretty rough. We fought from the moment we could stand. There was some quite severe physical violence at some stages. Oh yes, no doubt of it.
But later it was more sort of verbal scrapping. I mean, you disagreed famously and publicly over religion, for instance. I mean, what was it in particular that got each other's goat?
Oh, I think what got each other's goat was that we both occupied the same space in the same house, and I think he has said, he's much more Freudian than I am, that he felt that the classic first child's resentment at the arrival of another child. He claims to have undone the brake on my pram at the top of a steep slope in the hope of doing away with me at an early age. He may well be telling the truth. He also claims that he was once sitting by a flower bed and saw a menacing shadow behind him, and it was me coming up with a rake with evil intent. I don't remember this at all, but I don't know. But I actually, after we'd left home, we didn't actually have very much to do with each other. Fascinating thing, for some bizarre reason, the FBI kept a record of his home addresses, which was published a few years ago. And one of the addresses he had in London, I didn't even recognise. I didn't even know he lived there, which demonstrates how little contact we must have had with each other by that time.
But you did have this kind of sparring relationship as time went on over religion. I mean, why?
Well, I think why? Because people asked us to. Really, there was a famous, ghastly debate in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which I was invited to do by one of those outfits that organises these things, and I actually hadn't realised at the stage that Christopher had become a sort of rock star in the atheist world in America. So I turned up in Grand Rapids thinking we'd have a friendly little debate in front of 100 people, and found myself in this enormous Unitarian church with an audience of 1,000 people, all of whom hated me, not because they actually knew who I was, but because they really wanted to hear Christopher and were not at all interested in what I had to say at all. He'd attained this stardom, but it wasn't. Other people saw an opportunity to bring us together, and we were perfectly willing to have a go. Simply out of a sense of fun and why not? But I don't think either of us were going around asking people to arrange debates. There was another debate which we had over my book, The Abolition of Britain in London, which was much more fun and much more satisfactory because most of the people in the room knew us both, and so we were able to use humour a lot more than you can in a room where most people don't know you.
And beyond that, it wasn't that you, as it were, disliked each other, or was it?
I don't think so. No, I just think we lived separate lives. We had, although we were both in the same approximate trade, and in one ridiculous moment we both ended up on the Daily Express at pretty much in the same week. We really didn't actually do the same thing very much.
When your brother died in 2011 in a Texas hospital, you wrote afterwards that you'd parted on good terms. Is that important to you?
Oh, very, yes.
Why?
Well, wouldn't you be terribly haunted if you'd been on bad terms with somebody and they died, particularly somebody that close to you, and they died without your having the opportunity to say at least some friendly words before going?
Did the fact that your brother died an atheist pain you in any way? Bearing in mind what you've talked to me about your feelings about what happens after death, or your fear, did it affect you in ways that perhaps had nothing to do with debating points?
No, I don't think so. My conception of divine mercy is not one which says that because someone hasn't filled in the right form or worn the right badge, that everything's lost. So
atheists have a place in heaven in your...
Well, it's possible, but I mean, whether they're atheists by the time they get there is another matter altogether as well. Who knows? I mean, it really isn't for us to pass judgment on our fellow creatures, or to decide, or even actually in some ways discuss what their fate in eternity might be. The only person whose fate in eternity you have any right to discuss is your own.
Can I ask you how much your Christianity underpins your own personal moral beliefs? Do you see your moral choices and decisions in terms of your Christian beliefs?
Well, I try to, but obviously I very frequently fail to do so, and half of the problem is re-examining, say, a week of one's life, and to work out the many occasions when you've managed to do something you shouldn't have done, and to persuade yourself at the time that it was the right thing to do, which we do all the time. It's much more a question of realizing how much I failed than in actually succeeding.
And to what extent do you relate them to... I hesitate to say politics, because you'll tell me how much you dislike politics, but the public way in which we order our society? In other words, should biblical tenets be translated into social policy?
Well, which biblical tenets and how do you?
Okay, looking after the weak and the vulnerable, for instance, does that mean anything as obvious as a compassionate system of welfare?
Well, it may not mean, it may, for instance, not mean the sort of system of welfare that we have. It certainly means that you must indeed sustain and support the weak and the ill, and show mercy wherever you possibly can. But the question of how you do it might be more complicated than that. This is the difficulty. It's always possible to say that something is in general right, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the particular way in which it's being done is beyond criticism.
Just as a case in point, then, what would be the compassionate system of welfare that you would envisage?
Oh heavens! Have you got a 3-hour program we could
I just thought a wee example.
No, let's not get into that.
Why?
Well, because it would be extremely boring and it would be extremely long, apart from anything else.
I'm just trying to. I know
you are, but I'm trying not to.
Well, exactly, and I'm trying to push you a little bit further to try and get a sense from you of how your understanding of Christian morality and biblical precepts works its way out in the way that society organises itself, and where that positions you. You know, the Archbishop of Canterbury would say quite openly that because he believes this, he thinks we should look after those who can't get a job, say, in a certain way, you know, without putting words in his mouth. He doesn't balk from doing that. So I'm just wondering where. Well,
nor do I. I mean, why would you assume that I didn't? But
because you don't want to be specific.
Well, no, I don't want to be specific. I say because we would then be having a program about welfare, welfare programs and principles, and I don't want to do that.
Okay. Well, you've got a colourful turn of phrase, as we all know, and as you've just shown. You skewered David Cameron the other day by describing him as this charming but pointless person. You do sound quite angry a lot of the time as well.
Do I? I mean, do I sound angry to you now?
You're putting it on a bit, but that's my question really. Do you put on anger and
Absolutely not. No, I wouldn't dream of it. I mean, I do get angry sometimes, but
in your columns, you have a persona which sounds fairly irritated a lot of the time.
I think that would be reasonable to say that I am irritated by quite a lot of things, yes. But that's a reflection of what I actually feel and think. Why would I put it on? What would be the point? Well, let me just tell you one thing which may help you understand why I can't really answer that question in any other way. Yeah. I have never actually known what it is about what I write that other people like. What I do know is that whenever I've set out deliberately to please, I've failed. And therefore I regard it as a gift, which is not entirely my responsibility, in fact, possibly not mine at all. And therefore I can't say, but whatever it is that I write because that's what I think and what I feel, and for no other reason. And
you do sometimes get a fair bit of stick back. Does that get to you?
No, I think that it would be a very bad sign in a living society where people rightly disagreed about things. If you didn't, I believe in the adversarial principle. I think adversarial justice is good. I think an adversarial parliament is good. I think that adversarial debate is the most sure and certain way to reach the truth. And therefore, I have to understand that there will be people who dislike what I say and the way that I say it, and will say so. And if I didn't like it, then I could go off and do something else, but as it is, I quite enjoy it.
Tell me this, Peter, you spent a few of your childhood years in Scotland. I think they were happy ones from what I've read.
Lovely, yeah.
Do you still like us?
Possibly
less so after this morning?
Why would I ever stop? No, it was the place where I first, as it were, came to consciousness. The earliest voices I heard were Scottish voices. The earliest landscapes I saw were Scottish landscapes. You couldn't get that out of your head, or want to.
And what is it that is still in your head about Scotland?
Oh, actually, I felt a very powerful romance. I don't quite know why, but it just seemed to me to be full of, I suppose, the physical poetry of landscape.
Before you go, Peter, we're going to have one last music choice. You've chosen Jesus Christ, the Apple Tree. It's arranged by Elizabeth Poston on a recording Fair is the Heaven by the Cambridge Singers. Why this one?
Well, because it was arranged by Elizabeth Poston more or less at the time when I was going through my atheist frenzy in Cambridge. And she was not far away in Stevenage. Oddly enough, she was a friend of E.M. Forster's, I think, a classic Edwardian English intellectual. And there's a particular verse. It's an 18th century carol, and it seems to me to sum up a position of a lot of people who behave badly and then decide that they need to try another course in life. For happiness I long have sought, and pleasure dearly have I bought. I missed for all, but now I see 'tis found in Christ the apple tree.
Peter Hitchens, it's been a great pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.